Close your eyes gently, if you can, and allow yourself to arrive here in this very moment, because what you are about to hear is not just another introduction. It is a soft invitation, a quiet doorway into a night where your mind finally lets go, your body finally softens, and your entire being begins to remember what it feels like to truly rest. Tonight, you are not here to solve anything. You are not here to fix anything. You are not here to become anything different. Instead, you are simply here to release, to slow down, to breathe a little deeper than before, and to allow yourself to fall gently into sleep. And as you listen, you may notice that your thoughts do not need to be controlled or pushed away. They can simply drift like clouds moving slowly across a quiet sky. Nothing to hold on to, nothing to chase, nothing to resist, just a soft awareness that everything is already beginning to settle, because this is the moment where your nervous system starts to understand that it is safe now, safe to lower the guard, safe to release the tension you didn't even realize you were carrying, safe to let your shoulders drop, safe to let your jaw unclench, safe to let your breath become slower, softer, easier, and maybe, just maybe, you can feel it already, that subtle shift inside, like a door quietly closing on a long and busy day, like the world outside becoming a little more distant, a little more quiet, a little less important as your attention gently turns inward, toward rest, toward healing, toward sleep. You don't have to try to fall asleep, because sleep is not something you force. It is something you allow, something that arrives when you stop holding on so tightly to wakefulness. And so, right now, you are not doing sleep. You are allowing sleep. You are welcoming it, like an old friend returning after a long time away. And as each word reaches you, you might notice your breathing changing, not because you are trying, but because your body is remembering how to relax, remembering how to slow down, remembering how to let go. And with every breath in and every breath out, something inside you becomes quieter, softer, heavier in the most peaceful way. You may not even realize how much you needed this moment, this pause, this permission to stop carrying everything at once. But your body knows, your mind knows, your deeper self knows, and it is already responding, already softening, already preparing you for a night of deep restoration. Because tonight is not just about sleep, it is about repair, it is about renewal, it is about letting your system reset itself in the most natural way possible, like nature healing itself without effort, like the earth recovering after a long day of light and movement, like your mind washing itself clean in the silence of night. And as you continue to listen, you may feel your thoughts becoming slower, less sharp, less demanding, like distant echoes fading into calm. And even if thoughts come, they don't matter. They don't need your attention. They can simply pass by, like waves touching the shore and gently returning to the ocean. You are not your thoughts right now. You are the awareness beneath them, the quiet space that holds them. And in that space, there is peace, there is softness, there is a stillness that has always been there, waiting for you to return. And maybe your eyes feel heavier now. Maybe your body feels more supported by the surface beneath you. Maybe your breathing has already become slower without you noticing. And that is perfectly okay, because this is exactly what is supposed to happen. You are beginning to drift, not away from anything important, but toward something essential, toward rest, toward healing, toward deep sleep that restores not just your body, but your mind, your emotions, your energy, everything. And as the night unfolds, you will continue to sink deeper, not with effort, but with ease, not with struggle, but with surrender, because there is nothing you need to hold on to anymore. Everything can wait, everything can pause, everything can soften into the background as you step gently into the space where sleep begins to take over, where healing begins to unfold, where renewal begins quietly, naturally, powerfully. And now, without even trying, you may already be feeling the edges of wakefulness fading, becoming softer, becoming lighter, becoming distant. As sleep slowly comes closer, like a calm wave, rising gently, carrying you into rest, and all you have to do is let it happen, just let it happen, and sleep deeply, peacefully, completely. As you settle into this moment of stillness, really allow yourself to arrive here now, not in a rushed way, not with effort, but in a slow, natural, almost invisible kind of letting go, as though something inside you is finally exhaling after holding on for far too long. And you don't even need to know what you were holding or why you were holding it, because right now it is enough to simply notice that you are here and that you are safe enough to soften. And as you lie there or sit there, gently supported by whatever is holding your body right now, you may begin to notice something subtle happening underneath your awareness, something quiet, something gentle, like a slow unwinding, as if the tension of the entire day is no longer being carried in one heavy piece, but instead beginning to loosen, thread by thread, layer by layer, until it no longer feels like something you are carrying, but something that is slowly, naturally dissolving. And you don't have to try to make this happen, because your body already knows what to do. It has always known. It remembers rest, it remembers balance, it remembers how to release, even if your mind has forgotten for a while. And so right now, you are not learning something new. You are simply returning to a state that has always been yours, a state of ease, of softness, of quiet presence. And as you continue to rest here, you might notice your breath, not needing to change it, not needing to fix it, just noticing it as it moves in its own natural rhythm, in and out, slow, steady, almost like gentle waves touching a shoreline, never rushing, never forcing, just arriving and leaving in perfect rhythm. And with each breath, something inside you begins to align with that rhythm. Something begins to match it. Something begins to follow it. And maybe now you can begin to feel your body a little more clearly, not as something to control, but as something to allow. As your shoulders begin to drop ever so slightly, your jaw becoming a little softer, your forehead smoothing in ways you did not even realize it was tense, and your hands, your arms, your legs, all beginning to feel just a little heavier, just a little more grounded, just a little more ready to let go. And there is nothing you need to do about any of it, because your only task right now, if we can even call it a task, is to simply allow. Allow yourself to be here. Allow yourself to be supported. Allow yourself to not carry everything all at once, because for this moment, you are not required to solve anything, fix anything, or become anything more than what you already are. And as that realization gently settles into you, there may be a soft shift in your awareness, almost like your attention is no longer pulled outward into the world, but is slowly turning inward, like a light dimming in a room, not suddenly, but gradually, softly, until everything feels a little quieter, a little more distant, a little less demanding. And in that quiet distance, you may begin to notice the thoughts that are still there, but they are not as sharp now, not as loud, not as urgent. They are more like passing echoes, like distant sounds drifting across a wide open space, and you do not need to chase them, or hold on to them, or even understand them, because they are not here to stay, they are here to pass. And as you allow them to pass, something very interesting begins to happen. The space between those thoughts starts to grow, just a little at first, and then a little more, until you begin to notice the silence between them, the stillness underneath them, the quiet presence that was always there, even when everything felt busy on the surface. And that stillness, that quiet presence, is where you are beginning to settle now, not into sleep yet, not fully, but into the doorway of sleep, into the gentle threshold between waking and resting, where everything starts to slow down, where everything starts to soften, where everything starts to become less defined and more fluid. And you may notice now how your body feels differently than it did just a few moments ago. Not dramatically, but subtly, like a gentle sinking sensation, as if gravity itself is becoming kinder, softer, more supportive, holding you in a way that requires no effort from you at all. And with that support, you might feel your breathing becoming even slower now, even more natural, as if your body is beginning to breathe you rather than you breathing your body. A subtle shift, but an important one, because it means you are no longer in the space of doing. You are moving into the space of allowing. And in this allowing, there is a quiet comfort, a quiet reassurance that nothing is expected of you right now. Nothing is being asked, nothing is being demanded. And you can let go of the need to stay alert, or stay aware, or stay in control, because for this moment, control is not necessary. And as that sense of permission deepens, you may notice your awareness expanding slightly, not outward, but inward, like a soft sinking, a gentle descent, as though you were moving layer by layer into something deeper within yourself, something calm, something still, something timeless, and the world around you, whatever it is, begins to fade just a little more, not disappearing, but becoming less important, less immediate, as though it is moving farther away from you, while you move closer to yourself, closer to rest, closer to ease, closer to that quiet place where healing naturally begins. And even now, there is nothing you need to hold on to, not your thoughts, not your breath, not even this moment, because everything is already unfolding exactly as it should, gently, slowly, peacefully, carrying you without effort into a state where your body begins to remember how to restore itself. Perhaps you may begin to feel a subtle heaviness now, not in a negative way, but in a deeply comforting way, like sinking into a bed that finally feels right, like being held by something that understands you without needing explanation, a heaviness that invites you to stop trying and simply be. And as you continue to be here, in this soft unfolding, you may start to notice how little you need to do to continue this journey inward. Because your body knows the way, your breath knows the way, your mind, even in its quiet resistance, knows the way, and everything within you is already cooperating, already aligning, already moving toward rest. And so you do not need to follow anything or guide anything or manage anything, because you are already being guided gently, silently, effortlessly into a deeper sense of calm, where even the idea of effort begins to fade, and all that remains is this soft, continuous, peaceful drifting. And as you drift, you may begin to feel a sense of separation from the noise of the day, from the weight of responsibility, from the constant movement of thought, and in its place there is space, there is stillness, there is a quiet openness that feels like it has always been waiting for you. And in that openness, you are safe to go deeper, safe to slow down further, safe to let the edges of wakefulness soften completely, because nothing here can harm you, nothing here can disturb you. This is your space now, your moment now, your return to stillness. And as you remain here, continuing to soften, continuing to settle, continuing to drift, you may already notice that sleep is no longer something far away, but something gently approaching, like a soft tide rising quietly, carrying you without force into the beginning of deep rest. And as you move gently into this inner space, you may begin to notice something very subtle happening, something so quiet that at first it might feel like nothing at all. And yet it is important, because it is the beginning of a deeper letting go, a soft shifting of awareness away from everything outside and toward everything within. And right now, there is no need to analyze this shift, no need to label it, no need to understand it completely, because the mind often wants to make sense of everything. But rest, true rest, does not require understanding. It only requires permission. And in this moment, you are giving yourself that permission, perhaps for the first time today, to simply move inward without resistance. And as you move inward, you might notice that your thoughts are still present, but they are no longer holding the same weight. They are no longer pulling you as strongly as before. Instead, they feel distant, like echoes in another room, or like leaves floating on a slow river, moving, but not demanding anything from you. And you do not need to stop these thoughts, because stopping is effort, and effort is not needed here. Instead, you can simply allow them to exist, and in that allowing, something beautiful begins to happen. They begin to lose their intensity on their own. They begin to soften naturally, as if they were always meant to fade. And as they fade, you may start to notice the space between them, the quiet gaps, the silent pauses, and at first, those gaps may feel small, almost unnoticeable. But the more you rest here, the more those spaces begin to grow, gently expanding, creating more room for stillness, more room for calm, more room for you. And in that space, something begins to open inside you, not physically, but in awareness, like a soft widening, a gentle unfolding, as if your inner world is slowly becoming more spacious, more peaceful, more open to rest than it has been all day. And as this openness grows, you may begin to feel your breathing change again, not because you are controlling it, but because your body is responding to this space, this quiet, this permission to relax, and each breath becomes a little slower, a little deeper, a little softer, as though it knows it is finally allowed to take its time. And with each breath, you may notice your chest rising and falling in a smoother rhythm, no rush, no pressure, just natural movement, and in that natural movement there is a sense of returning to something familiar, something safe, something deeply calming. And as you continue to rest in this inner space, you may begin to notice your body more clearly again, but in a different way than before, not as something active or tense, but as something that is slowly becoming heavier, warmer, more grounded, as if every part of you is gently settling downward, deeper into support, deeper into stillness. And perhaps now your shoulders feel a little lower than before. Your arms feel a little heavier. Your hands feel softer. Your legs more relaxed. And this relaxation is not forced. It is not something you are doing. It is something that is happening on its own, naturally, like a wave slowly retreating from the shore. And as your body continues to settle, your mind begins to follow, because the mind and body are not separate in this experience. They are connected, and when one begins to soften, the other naturally follows. And so your thinking becomes slower, quieter, less urgent, and even the need to think begins to fade slightly, as if the mind itself is becoming tired of holding everything, tired of organizing everything, tired of keeping everything in place. And in that tiredness, there is relief, because you do not have to keep holding everything anymore. And as that relief begins to grow, you may feel a gentle shift inside, almost like something loosening, something releasing, something finally giving itself permission to stop trying so hard. And in that stopping, there is peace, a very quiet peace, but a very real one. And now, as you continue to move deeper into this inner space, you may notice that the outside world feels further away, not in a worrying way, but in a comforting way, as if it is no longer pressing against you, no longer demanding your attention, no longer pulling you outward, and in its place there is a soft inward focus, a gentle turning, like a flower slowly closing at night, not because anything is wrong, but because it is time to rest, time to withdraw, time to return to stillness. And as you turn inward, you may begin to notice sensations that were always there but often ignored. The subtle feeling of your body being supported, the quiet rhythm of your heartbeat, the softness of air moving through your breath, all of these small experiences becoming more noticeable now, more present, more calming, and you do not need to do anything with these sensations. Just notice them, allow them, let them be part of this quiet unfolding, because even noticing them gently anchors you deeper into this moment, deeper into calm, deeper into relaxation. And as you continue to stay with this calm, you may begin to feel your thoughts slowing even further, becoming less like structured ideas and more like passing impressions, fragments of awareness drifting by without urgency, without direction, and in that slowing there is a sense of space, a sense of openness, as if your mind is no longer crowded, no longer full, but beginning to feel spacious, quiet, almost empty in the most peaceful way. And in that spaciousness, something very gentle begins to happen. A sense of distance from stress, from tension, from everything that once felt heavy, not because it is being pushed away, but because it is naturally losing its grip on you. And as it loosens its grip, you may feel yourself becoming lighter in awareness. Even though your body feels heavier, there is a contrast here. Body sinking, mind quieting, awareness softening. And in that contrast, a deep balance begins to form. And as that balance forms, you may start to feel a subtle calm spreading through you. Not dramatic, not sudden, but gradual, like warmth spreading slowly through cold air, like still water becoming even stiller. And in that calm, there is no urgency left, no need to move forward, no need to go back, only this moment, only this breath, only this gentle experience of being here, resting, allowing, softening. And as you continue to allow, something inside you begins to trust this process more deeply, the trust that you are safe enough to let go, safe enough to slow down, safe enough to drift without control. And that trust is important because it allows you to go deeper, not through effort, but through surrender, a quiet surrender that does not feel like losing anything, but like gaining space, gaining peace, gaining rest. And as this surrender deepens, you may notice your awareness becoming softer again, like the edges of your mind are dissolving gently, not disappearing, but relaxing, becoming less defined, more fluid. And in that fluidity, you may begin to feel as if you are no longer holding onto the surface of wakefulness, but instead slowly moving beneath it into a quieter layer, a deeper level of rest, where everything feels more distant, more peaceful, more still. And even now, there is nothing you need to hold on to, nothing you need to maintain, because this journey inward is happening on its own, naturally, gently, guiding you step by step, thought by thought, breath by breath, into a deeper state of calm. And as you continue to move with this calm, you may already sense that something within you is preparing to let go even further, to soften even more, to drift closer to sleep, not suddenly, but gently, like a slow sinking into deep water where everything becomes quiet, everything becomes soft, everything becomes still. And as everything begins to slow, you may start to notice your breathing becoming more natural, more effortless, almost as if it is happening on its own now, without direction, without control, without any need for you to guide it. And in that realization alone, something very gentle begins to shift inside you, because so much of the day is often carried through control, through effort, through managing each moment. And now, here, in this quiet space, there is nothing left to manage. And as that understanding settles in, your breath continues its soft rhythm, in and out, slow, steady, unforced, and each inhale seems to bring a little more space into your body, a little more openness, a little more calm, while each exhale feels like a release, a letting go, as if something invisible is being gently placed down, something you no longer need to carry into this moment. And you may not even realize how much your body has been waiting for this, waiting for permission to stop holding so tightly, waiting for permission to soften without guilt, waiting for permission to simply exist without performing anything. And now that permission has arrived quietly, gently, through your own awareness, and your body responds in the only way it knows how, by relaxing, by easing, by slowing down. And as your breath continues to slow, you may begin to feel your chest becoming lighter in one way, and your body becoming heavier in another, a beautiful balance forming between weight and weightlessness, as if you are both sinking deeper into support and floating deeper into calm at the same time. And in this space, thoughts may still arise, but they no longer feel sharp or demanding. They feel softer now, like distant ripples on water, appearing and fading without pulling you away, without needing your response. And you may notice that you are no longer following them as closely as before, because something in you is becoming more interested in stillness than in thinking. And as stillness begins to take priority, you might notice a subtle widening in your awareness, not outward into the world, but inward into silence, as if the space inside you is slowly expanding, becoming more open, more spacious, more gentle. And in that spaciousness, everything begins to feel less urgent, less heavy, less defined. And with each passing moment, you may feel yourself settling deeper into that inner space, like sinking into soft sand or floating just beneath the surface of a calm ocean, where sound becomes distant, where movement becomes minimal, where everything feels held in a quiet suspension, and your body, without needing instruction, begins to follow this inner stillness, your muscles loosening in layers you didn't even know were tight, your shoulders dropping just a little more, your neck softening, your jaw unclenching, your hands becoming warmer, heavier, more relaxed. And as this physical release continues, your mind also begins to follow, not because it is being forced, but because it is naturally tired of holding so much, tired of organizing everything, tired of processing endless streams of thought. And in this gentle tiredness, there is relief, a soft surrender that does not feel like loss, but like returning home. And now, as you continue to rest here, you may notice something very important happening in the background of your awareness. The space between thoughts is growing, just slightly at first, but noticeably, and in those spaces there is silence, pure silence, not empty in a cold way, but open, warm, welcoming. And that silence begins to become more familiar, more comforting, more inviting, as if it has always been there, just waiting for you to notice it, waiting for you to return to it. And as you rest in it, you may begin to feel that you do not need to chase anything anymore, not thoughts, not feelings, not answers, because everything you need in this moment is already here, in this quiet presence. And as that realization gently deepens, your breathing may slow even further, becoming almost like a background rhythm, something that continues without effort, without attention. And in that effortless rhythm, you may feel a subtle wave of relaxation spreading through your entire body, not in one place, but everywhere at once, and it begins softly, maybe in your forehead, smoothing out tension you didn't notice before, then gently moving down into your eyes, your cheeks, your jaw, loosening every small point of holding, and then flowing further into your neck and shoulders, where so much of the day's weight is often stored. And as that weight begins to release, there is a feeling of sinking, not in resistance, but in relief, as if your body is finally being allowed to be supported fully, without needing to stay alert, without needing to stay ready, just simply supported, just simply held, and from there, this wave of relaxation continues downward, through your arms, your chest, your back, your abdomen, softening everything it touches, until even your hands feel heavier, calmer, more still, as if they no longer need to do anything at all, and further down into your legs, your knees, your feet, each part becoming softer, more grounded, more deeply connected to rest, as if your entire body is slowly being placed into a state of deep comfort, layer by layer, breath by breath. And as your body softens like this, your mind begins to mirror it, thoughts slowing, spacing out, becoming less frequent, less structured, until even thinking feels like a distant activity, something happening far away, not here, not now. And in that distance, you may begin to feel a sense of drifting, a gentle internal movement, not upward, not outward, but inward, as if your awareness is slowly descending into deeper levels of calm, into quieter layers of consciousness, where everything feels softer, slower, safer, and you do not need to guide this drift, because your awareness already knows the way. It always has, and all you are doing now is allowing it, allowing yourself to be carried by something deeper than thought, something quieter than effort, something more natural than control. And as you drift, you may begin to notice that time itself feels different, not linear, not urgent, but stretched, softened, as if each moment is expanding slightly, giving you more space to simply be, more space to rest, more space to release. And in that expanded sense of time, everything begins to feel less important in a way that is freeing, not dismissive, but liberating, because the weight of importance often creates tension. And here, in this space, there is no need for tension, and so your entire system begins to follow this invitation into ease. Your breath slows, your heartbeat steadies, your muscles release further, and your awareness becomes softer, almost dreamlike. And in this dreamlike awareness, you may start to feel as if you are no longer fully in one place, but rather floating between layers of experience, sometimes aware, sometimes not aware, sometimes thinking, sometimes simply being, and all of it is perfectly okay, because there is no requirement to stay fully awake, and no requirement to fall fully asleep. There is only this gentle in-between space where healing often begins, where restoration naturally unfolds, where the nervous system finally gets to rest without interruption. And as you continue to rest here, something very subtle begins to change again. The sense of effort fades even further, until even the idea of trying feels distant, unnecessary, almost forgotten, and in its place there is ease, a deepening ease, like sinking into warm water, like resting beneath a soft night sky, like being held by silence itself, and that silence, that quiet presence, begins to feel more real than anything else. And so you continue, not moving forward, not moving backward, but simply sinking deeper into this calm, deeper into this softness, deeper into this natural state of letting go. And somewhere within this letting go, you may already begin to feel the first gentle signs of sleep approaching, not as something sudden, but as something inevitable, something natural, something that has been slowly unfolding all along, guiding you, carrying you softly, quietly into rest. And as calmness begins to grow inside you, you may not notice it all at once, because calmness does not usually arrive loudly. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. Instead, it spreads quietly, like a soft light filling a dark room, so gently, so evenly, that only after a while do you realize something has changed. Something has softened. Something inside you is no longer as tight, no longer as heavy, no longer as active as it was just a few moments ago. And in this subtle shift, you may begin to feel a different relationship with your own body, as if your body is no longer something you are controlling, but something you are gently returning to, something you are slowly being welcomed into, as though your body itself has been waiting for this moment, waiting for you to stop rushing through it, waiting for you to finally arrive within it. And as you arrive, you might notice a gentle heaviness beginning to form. Not a burdened heaviness, but a comforting one, like sinking into a bed that finally feels right after a long journey, like being placed down softly after carrying something for too long. And in that sinking, there is no resistance, only release. And you do not need to understand where this heaviness is coming from, because it is not something you are creating. It is something you are allowing, a natural response to safety, a natural response to slowing down, a natural response to no longer needing to stay alert. And as that sense of safety begins to deepen, your breathing continues its quiet rhythm, slow, steady, unforced, and each breath seems to take you a little further away from effort, a little further away from tension, a little further away from the need to do anything at all. And with each exhale, there is a gentle release, not dramatic, not sudden, but soft, almost like something loosening its grip from the inside, something you didn't even realize was still being held. And now, without effort, it begins to let go. And as more of these small releases happen, your body begins to feel more supported, more grounded, more still, as if the surface beneath you has become more than just physical support. It has become emotional support, mental support, energetic support, as if you are being held completely, without needing to hold yourself anymore. And in that holding, or rather, in that being held, something inside you begins to soften even further, because so much of the tension in life comes from the feeling of having to hold everything together. And now, for this moment, you don't. And as that realization settles deeper, You may notice your thoughts becoming less structured, less insistent, as if they are losing their sharp edges, becoming more like soft echoes, or distant movements, or faint impressions passing through a quiet sky, and you are not chasing them, and you are not pushing them away. You are simply allowing them to pass, like clouds drifting across an open horizon, never stopping, never needing your attention, just moving, fading, dissolving. And in that dissolving, there is space, more space than before, space between thoughts, space within thoughts, space behind thoughts. And in that space, something very important begins to emerge. Silence. Not an empty silence, not a cold silence, but a living silence, a warm silence. A silence that feels like it has always been there, underneath everything, waiting patiently for you to notice it. And as you notice it, even briefly, something in your nervous system responds, not with words, but with sensation, a softening, a loosening, a quieting, as if your entire system is recognizing, it is safe now, I can relax now. I do not need to stay alert. And that recognition spreads, not quickly, but steadily, from your mind into your breath, from your breath into your chest, from your chest into your shoulders, into your arms, into your hands, into your legs, into every part of your body that has been holding even the smallest amount of tension. And you may begin to feel that tension dissolving in layers, not all at once, but gradually, like ice melting under gentle warmth, like heavy clothing being slowly removed after a long day, like a tight grip loosening without effort. And as this loosening continues, your body may feel heavier, but in a deeply comforting way, a weight that signals safety, a weight that signals rest, a weight that signals permission to stop holding yourself so tightly. And in that weight, there is a strange kind of relief, because you do not need to maintain posture. You do not need to maintain awareness. You do not need to maintain anything at all. You are allowed to simply exist. And as you exist in this way, something very quiet begins to unfold inside you, a sense of expansion. Not outward, but inward, as if your inner space is becoming larger, softer, more open, and in that openness, everything feels less compressed, less urgent, less confined, as if your awareness is no longer sitting in a tight room of thoughts, but in a wide open field of stillness, and that stillness begins to deepen, and as it deepens, you may notice that your sense of time is changing slightly, not disappearing, but loosening, as if each second is no longer a sharp unit, but a soft wave flowing into the next, without interruption. And in that flow, you may feel yourself drifting, not in a direction, but into a state of ease, a state of softness, a state where nothing needs to be held tightly anymore. And even your awareness of trying begins to fade, because trying requires effort, and effort is no longer needed here. You are not doing sleep, you are not doing relaxation, you are allowing it, and that difference is everything. And as you allow it more deeply, your breath may become even slower, so subtle now that it feels almost like the breath is happening by itself, as if your body has taken over the responsibility of breathing in the most gentle way possible. And in that gentle rhythm, something inside you begins to recalibrate, like a system returning to balance, like a mind returning to quiet, like a body returning to rest. And you may begin to feel a subtle distance forming between you and the world of effort. Not separation in a negative sense, but release, like stepping out of a noisy space into a quiet one, like moving from brightness into gentle dusk. And in that dusk-like awareness, everything becomes softer. Even your thoughts, even your identity as a thinker, begins to loosen, and what remains is presence, simple presence, soft presence, quiet presence. And as that presence deepens, you may feel yourself sinking further, not downward physically, but inwardly, into layers of calm that feel more stable, more peaceful, more still, and each layer you pass through feels quieter than the last, as if you are moving through levels of relaxation, each one deeper than the one before, and at every level, your body releases more, your mind quiets more, your awareness softens more, and somewhere within this deepening, you may begin to notice that even the idea of staying awake feels less important, less necessary, less relevant, because what is emerging now is a different state entirely, a state of letting go so complete that it no longer requires effort to continue, and you are not falling, you are not losing control, you are simply returning to rest, returning to stillness, returning to the natural rhythm your body has always known. And as you continue to return, you may already feel sleep beginning to approach, not suddenly, not forcefully, but gently, like a soft tide rising, like a quiet wave carrying you inward, deeper and deeper into rest. And as relaxation begins to deepen, you may start to notice something very subtle happening in the background of your awareness, almost like a quiet shift in the atmosphere inside you, where everything begins to feel slightly more distant, slightly more softened, slightly more removed from urgency, and it is not something you need to analyze or understand, because this kind of relaxation does not belong to thinking, it belongs to allowing. And so right now, you are not figuring anything out. You are not solving anything. You are simply being carried gently, slowly, deeper into this experience. And as you are carried, you might notice your body beginning to feel heavier in a very specific way, not uncomfortable, not restrictive, but deeply grounding, as if gravity itself has become more supportive, more gentle, more intentional, holding you in a way that allows you to completely let go. And in that letting go, there is a quiet permission forming inside you, a permission to stop holding your posture, to stop holding your thoughts, to stop holding your emotions, to stop holding the day itself, because for this moment, none of that needs to be carried. And as that permission settles in, you may begin to notice your shoulders softening even more, your chest becoming less tight, your abdomen releasing subtle tension you didn't even realize was still there, and your entire body beginning to feel as if it is slowly melting into stillness. And as stillness grows, the sounds around you may start to fade into the background, not disappearing, but becoming less relevant, less important. As your attention naturally turns inward, away from the outer world, and toward the inner experience of calm, and this inward turning is not forced, it is natural, like a flower closing gently at night, like the sky dimming slowly at sunset, like the body instinctively knowing it is time to rest. And so you do not need to guide it, you only need to allow it. And as you allow it, you may begin to notice your breathing again. But now it feels different, more spacious, more fluid, more effortless, as if your body is breathing in a way that requires no attention from you at all, and each inhale brings a soft expansion, a gentle opening, a quiet sense of space, while each exhale brings a soft release, a letting go, a dissolving of anything still held inside. And over time, without effort, your breath begins to slow even more, not because you are controlling it, but because your entire system is responding to relaxation, responding to safety, responding to stillness. And in that slowing, something very important begins to happen. The mind begins to soften its grip on activity. Thoughts begin to lose their urgency, their sharpness, their demand for attention. And instead of structured thinking, there are now only fragments, impressions, passing echoes, like distant sounds moving across a quiet valley, never staying long enough to disturb your peace. And you are not following them anymore, not because you are resisting, but because there is no need, because something deeper inside you is becoming more interesting than thought, something quieter, something softer, something more peaceful. And that something is stillness. And as stillness becomes more present, you may begin to feel a subtle expansion inside your awareness, as if the boundaries of your thoughts are becoming less defined, as if your inner space is no longer limited, but open, wide, and gently infinite. And in that openness, everything begins to feel less compressed, less urgent, less demanding, as if life itself is stepping back for a moment, giving you space, giving you silence, giving you rest. And as that space opens, you may notice your body responding even more deeply, sinking, releasing, softening in layers, as if each part of you is slowly remembering how to let go completely. And it might begin in the smallest places, the tiny muscles around your eyes, the tension in your forehead, the subtle tightness in your jaw, all beginning to dissolve without effort, without instruction, and then moving deeper into your neck, your shoulders, your arms, where the weight of the day often collects. And now that weight begins to loosen, to fade, to disappear into stillness. And as that release travels downward, your chest begins to soften, your breathing becomes even smoother, your heartbeat quieter in awareness, your entire upper body sinking into a state of deep ease. And further down, your abdomen relaxes, releasing unconscious holding patterns, letting go of subtle stress you may not even have known was still there. And then your hips, your legs, your knees, your feet, each part becoming heavier, softer, more grounded, as if your entire body is being gently placed into a deeper state of rest. And in that rest, there is no resistance left, no need to hold anything together, no need to maintain anything at all. And this is where something very quiet begins to change. Your sense of awareness itself begins to soften, not disappear, but blur at the edges, like the difference between waking and dreaming slowly becoming less distinct. And in that blurring, there is a sense of drifting, gentle drifting, like floating without direction, like sinking without effort, like being carried by something calm and steady that knows exactly where to take you. And you are not trying to go anywhere, because there is nowhere you need to go. You are already exactly where rest begins, and as you remain here, something within you begins to slow even further. Not just your breath, not just your thoughts, but your entire experience of being. Everything becomes more spacious, more quiet, more distant, and even the idea of you being the one experiencing begins to soften, because identity itself becomes less rigid, less defined, more fluid, more peaceful. And in that fluidity, there is a sense of freedom, not dramatic freedom, but quiet freedom, the freedom of not needing to be alert, the freedom of not needing to respond, the freedom of simply existing without pressure. And as that freedom deepens, your nervous system begins to settle even further, like a deep internal sigh, like a long-awaited release, like finally arriving somewhere safe enough to stop guarding yourself. And in that safety, your entire system begins to recalibrate, shifting away from alertness and into restoration. And you may not notice the exact moment it happens, because it does not happen in a single moment. It happens gradually, continuously, softly, and as it continues, you may feel yourself becoming more distant from effort, more distant from control, more distant from the outer noise of thought, and in its place there is only softness, only calm, only stillness expanding quietly through you. And as you rest here, something very subtle begins to guide you even deeper, like an invisible current of calm, carrying you beneath the surface of wakefulness into a quieter layer of experience. And this layer feels different, because here everything is slower, everything is softer, everything is more gentle, and you may begin to feel that sleep is no longer something approaching from far away, but something already beginning to touch you, already beginning to hold you, already beginning to invite you in. And all you need to do is allow it. Allow yourself to drift, allow yourself to soften, allow yourself to move deeper into this quiet unfolding, where relaxation becomes rest, and rest slowly becomes sleep. And as everything starts to soften, you may begin to notice a very quiet change happening in your body. Not sudden, not dramatic, but slow, steady, almost invisible at first, like warmth spreading through still water, like tension gently dissolving without being asked to leave, like your entire system slowly remembering that it does not need to stay braced anymore. And in this remembering, something inside you begins to release, not all at once, but in layers, in waves, in soft waves of letting go that move through your body without effort, without instruction, without resistance. And as this release continues, your muscles begin to respond in their own quiet way, your forehead smoothing without you trying, your eyes resting deeper within their sockets, your jaw unclenching so gently that you may barely notice it happening, and yet it is happening. And this is important because so much of the body holds onto the day without permission, holding conversations, holding emotions, holding decisions, holding tension that was never meant to stay for so long. And now, here, in this space, your body is finally being given permission to stop holding. And as that permission settles deeper, your shoulders begin to drop slightly more, not because you are making them drop, but because they are finally allowed to, as if they have been waiting all day for this exact moment, waiting for you to stop lifting, stop carrying, stop bracing. And in that release, there is a subtle shift in sensation, a feeling of sinking, not into heaviness in a negative way, but into support, deep support, like the ground beneath you has become softer, more welcoming, more able to hold you completely. And as you are held, your breath naturally deepens again, not forced, not controlled, but simply responding to the safety that is now present, responding to the stillness that is unfolding within you. And each inhale feels a little slower, a little smoother, a little more spacious, as if your body is gently expanding into calm. And each exhale feels like a quiet surrender, a soft release of anything still held, anything still tight, anything still lingering from the day. And over time, without effort, your breathing begins to find its own rhythm, a rhythm that does not require attention, a rhythm that does not require thought, a rhythm that simply carries you. And in this rhythm, something very important begins to happen. Your nervous system starts to recognize safety on a deeper level, not as a thought, but as a feeling, a deep physical knowing that it is okay to relax now. And as that knowing spreads, your entire body begins to respond, like a wave moving through sand, slowly reshaping everything it touches, and your chest softens further, releasing subtle tightness. You may not even remember holding. Your abdomen relaxes more deeply, allowing your breathing to move freely. Your back settles into the surface beneath you with greater ease, as if gravity itself is now working in harmony with your rest. And your legs, your knees, your feet, each begin to feel heavier in the most comforting way, as if they are being gently guided downward into complete support, into complete stillness, into complete rest. And as this physical release deepens, your mind begins to follow, because the mind is closely connected to the body, and when the body begins to let go, the mind slowly begins to follow that example. Not immediately, not forcefully, but gradually. And so your thoughts begin to slow, not because you are trying to slow them, but because there is less need for them now, less need to analyze, less need to plan, less need to replay, less need to hold on to anything at all. And in that space of reduced need, thoughts begin to lose their intensity, their urgency, their sharp edges. They become softer. They become slower. They become less defined, like distant ripples fading across a calm lake. And as they fade, you begin to notice something very subtle emerging underneath them. Silence. Not empty silence, not uncomfortable silence, but a warm, living silence. A silence that feels supportive, a silence that feels safe, a silence that feels like it has always been there, waiting beneath everything else. And as you become aware of that silence, your attention naturally begins to rest in it, not as something you are trying to focus on, but as something you are being gently drawn into. And in that drawing inwards, your awareness begins to shift again, not outward toward the world, but inward toward sensation, toward breath, toward stillness, toward presence. And as this inward shift continues, you may notice your perception of time beginning to change, not dramatically, but subtly, as if each second is no longer a fixed unit, but a soft wave flowing into the next, without interruption, without resistance, without effort. And in that flowing, there is a deepening sense of continuity, a sense that you are no longer moving through time in a rushed way, but drifting through it gently, as if time itself is becoming slower just for you. And in this slower time, your awareness begins to soften even more, almost as if the edges of your thoughts are dissolving, almost as if the boundaries of your attention are becoming less rigid, almost as if everything is beginning to blur gently into calm. And in that blur, there is peace, a very quiet peace, but a very real one. And as that peace settles deeper, your breathing becomes even more effortless, so effortless that it almost feels like breathing is happening by itself, as if your body has taken over the process completely, and all you are doing now is allowing it to continue, allowing it to slow, allowing it to guide you deeper into rest. And with each breath, something inside you begins to drift further inward, not away from anything important, but towards something essential, toward stillness, toward quiet, toward rest. And as you drift, you may begin to feel a gentle separation forming between you and the noise of thinking. Not separation in a distant or lonely way, but separation in a freeing way, like stepping out of a crowded space into a quiet room, like leaving behind noise and entering softness. And in that softness, your body feels even heavier, even more supported, even more relaxed, and yet your awareness feels lighter, more open, more spacious, and this combination creates a very unique feeling, a feeling of floating while also sinking into the surface beneath you, floating within awareness itself, and in that balance, something very deep begins to stabilize within you. A calm that does not shift easily, a stillness that does not break easily, a peace that does not require effort to maintain. And as that stability grows, your mind begins to quiet even further. Thoughts now feel distant, almost unnecessary, almost irrelevant, as if they belong to another time, another space, and you are no longer there. You are here in this soft unfolding, in this gentle release, in this deepening calm. And as you remain here, something begins to shift again, a subtle indication that your system is preparing for even deeper rest, for deeper release, for deeper letting go. And you may not know exactly when it happens, but you begin to feel it. The edges of wakefulness softening, the pull of sleep growing closer, not as something forced, but as something natural, something inevitable, something already unfolding within you. And all you need to do now is continue to allow, continue to soften, continue to drift into deeper and deeper rest. And as your body continues its quiet release, you may begin to notice something even more subtle unfolding now, something that does not ask for attention, but gently receives it anyway, as your breathing continues its slow rhythm, in and out, like soft waves touching a shore that has known many storms, but is finally becoming still. And with each breath, something inside you begins to synchronize with that rhythm, not through effort, not through control, but through surrender, a natural alignment happening on its own, as if your entire system is remembering a deeper truth, that it does not need to rush, that it does not need to strive, that it does not need to hold itself together so tightly anymore. And in that remembering, your breath becomes the anchor, the soft, steady anchor that keeps you gently connected to this moment, not pulling you anywhere, not pushing you anywhere, just holding you here in this space of quiet unfolding. As you remain anchored in this breath, you may begin to notice your body feeling even heavier, but not in a burdensome way. Instead, in a deeply comforting way, like sinking deeper into a bed that finally understands you, like being gently lowered into warmth after a long day of carrying too much. And there is no resistance in this sinking, only acceptance, only ease, only a soft willingness to let gravity do what it has always done, but now without opposition, without tension, without the need to resist it. And as your body continues to sink, your awareness begins to soften again, not disappearing, but becoming less sharp, less focused on details, and more open, more spacious, more diffuse. If everything is gently blurring at the edges, and in that blur, your thoughts begin to slow even further, not stopping, but spacing out, becoming more like passing impressions than structured ideas, as if the mind itself is beginning to loosen its grip on constant activity. And you may notice now that even when a thought arises, it does not pull you in the same way anymore. It appears, it lingers briefly, and then it fades, like a ripple dissolving back into still water. And in between those ripples, there is something very important. Silence, not forced silence, not empty silence, but natural silence. The kind that exists underneath everything, the kind that has always been there, even when it was covered by noise. And as this silence becomes more noticeable, something in your nervous system begins to respond, not with words, but with sensation, a softening, a loosening, a quiet sense of it is safe to relax further now, and that safety spreads slowly, gently through your entire body, first into your shoulders, where so much of the day is often carried, and now they begin to drop even more, not abruptly, but gradually, as if they are finally being allowed to rest fully, then into your chest, where subtle tension dissolves into ease, allowing your breath to move more freely, more naturally, more softly, then into your abdomen, where hidden layers of holding begin to unwind, releasing without effort, releasing without instruction, and then into your back, your arms, your hands, where each small muscle begins to let go in its own time, in its own way, without needing guidance, and further down, into your hips, your thighs, your knees, your calves, your feet, until your entire body feels like it is being gently held by something larger than itself, something supportive, something steady, something deeply calming. And in that holding, you may begin to feel a sense of surrender growing inside you, not forced surrender, but natural surrender, the kind that comes when the body realizes it no longer needs to stay alert. And as surrender deepens, your breath continues its steady rhythm, but now it feels even more automatic, as if it is happening beneath your awareness, without needing participation. And this is important, because when breathing becomes automatic in awareness, the mind begins to step back from control. And when the mind steps back from control, something deeper begins to take over, a quieter intelligence, a deeper rhythm, a natural flow that has always been there beneath thought. And as you begin to rest in that flow, you may notice that your sense of self begins to soften slightly, not disappearing, but becoming less rigid, less defined, more fluid, as if you are no longer confined to the edges of your thoughts, but expanding gently into the space around them. And in that expansion, there is a feeling of lightness within heaviness, a strange but peaceful combination where your body feels grounded, but your awareness feels weightless. And in that weightlessness, you may begin to feel as though you are floating just slightly, not physically, but inwardly, as if your attention is drifting above the surface of thought, above the surface of sensation, into a quieter layer of experience. And this drifting is not random, it is guided by stillness itself, stillness that is becoming more present now, stillness that is becoming more familiar, stillness that is becoming more welcoming. And as stillness grows, everything else begins to fade slightly into the background. The urgency of thought fades, the sharpness of emotion fades, the intensity of awareness fades, and what remains is a soft, continuous sense of being here, just now, just this breath. And in that simplicity, there is something deeply stabilizing, something deeply grounding, something that feels like coming home to yourself in the most effortless way. And as you rest in that sense of homecoming, your breathing continues to slow, becoming even more delicate, more subtle, almost whisper-like in awareness. And with each breath, you may feel yourself drifting further inward, not away from anything important, but towards something essential, toward quiet, toward ease, toward rest. And the deeper you drift, the less effort is required to stay in this space, because this space does not demand anything from you. It only invites, it only holds, it only allows. And as you continue to allow, your awareness begins to shift once again, not outward, but inward, into a deeper layer of calm, where thoughts are fewer, where sensations are softer, where everything feels slightly more distant and yet more peaceful. And in that peaceful distance, you may begin to notice that sleep is no longer something far away. It is closer now, not rushing, not forcing, but gently approaching, like a soft tide rising quietly in the night, carrying you without effort, carrying you without resistance, carrying you gently toward deeper rest. And as your mind begins to slow even more, you may start to notice something very subtle happening in the space between your thoughts, something that is not loud enough to demand attention, but present enough to gently change the way everything feels. Because thoughts are still coming, but they are no longer forming a tight chain. They are no longer pulling you forward. They are no longer building pressure inside your awareness. Instead, they are becoming lighter, softer, more distant, like faint ripples spreading across a wide and calm lake. And you are no longer reaching for them in the same way, not because you are stopping yourself, but because something deeper inside you is no longer interested in holding on to them. And that shift, that quiet disinterest, is important because it is not forced, it is natural. It is what happens when the mind begins to realize it does not need to stay active all the time. And as that realization gently settles in, you may begin to feel a widening inside your awareness, not physically, but experientially, as if your inner space is slowly becoming more open, more spacious, more uncontained. And in that spaciousness, thoughts begin to lose their density. They are still there, but they feel thinner now, less solid, less important, less central to your experience. And in their place, something else begins to emerge. Silence, not empty silence, not uncomfortable silence, but soft silence, living silence, a silence that feels like it has always been there, beneath everything, waiting patiently for attention that never fully arrived until now. And as your awareness gently rests in that silence, something very important begins to happen in your body, a deeper release, not just muscular, not just physical, but systemic, as if your entire nervous system is beginning to downshift, moving away from alertness, away from readiness, away from response, and moving slowly into restoration. And you do not need to guide this shift, because your body already knows how to do it. It has done it many times before. Every time you have truly rested, every time you have fallen into deep sleep, every time you have let go completely, and now it is remembering again. And as that memory returns, your breathing becomes even more subtle, almost like a background wave, something happening without effort, without attention, without direction, and each breath is now less about air and more about rhythm, a rhythm that is slow, a rhythm that is steady, a rhythm that gently carries you deeper into this state of ease. And as you continue to rest in that rhythm, you may notice your body feeling even more supported than before, as if the surface beneath you has become more than physical support. It feels like emotional support, mental support, energetic support, as if everything beneath you is now working together to hold you in complete stillness. And in that stillness, something very quiet begins to unfold, a fading of effort, not sudden, not dramatic, but gradual, like a candle slowly burning lower without wind, like tension slowly dissolving without force, like a system gradually remembering it no longer needs to stay on. And as effort fades, your mind begins to soften again. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer demand participation. They no longer demand reaction. They no longer demand engagement. They simply pass through, like shadows moving across a wall that you are no longer watching closely. And in that distance, there is peace, because when thoughts no longer pull you in, something else becomes available. Presence, simple presence, uncomplicated presence, the experience of being here without needing anything else. And as that presence deepens, you may begin to feel your awareness shifting again, not outward, not upward, but inward, like a gentle sinking, a quiet descent into a deeper layer of calm, where everything becomes slower, softer, more undefined. And in that deeper layer, your sense of time begins to stretch. Seconds feel less segmented. Moments feel less separated. Everything flows together more smoothly, as if time itself is becoming softer just for you. And in that softness, your body responds even more deeply, because the body always follows the mind. And when the mind slows, the body follows. So your muscles release further, your posture loosens further, your internal systems begin to settle further, as if every part of you is slowly agreeing, yes, it is safe now, I can rest. And that agreement spreads from your head to your neck, to your shoulders, to your chest, to your abdomen, to your hips, to your legs, all the way down to your feet, until your entire body feels unified in stillness, a single field of calm, a single field of relaxation, a single field of quiet ease. And within that field, something very subtle begins to happen. The boundary between thoughts and silence begins to blur, not disappear, but soften, so that even thinking feels less separate from stillness, and stillness feels more present than thinking. And in that shift, you may begin to feel as if you are no longer standing at the edge of wakefulness, but already moving beneath it into a quieter layer of experience, where everything feels more dreamlike, more fluid, more gentle. And you do not need to resist this movement, because it is not a fall. It is a return to deeper calm, a return to natural rest, a return to the state your body has been waiting for all day. And as you continue to return, your breathing becomes so soft now that it almost disappears into awareness, not gone, but barely noticeable, like a whisper within silence. And even your awareness of your body begins to soften, as if you are no longer contained within a single fixed point, but expanding gently into the space around you, floating, sinking, drifting, all at the same time. And in that drifting, there is no direction, only movement inward, deeper, quieter, softer, until even the idea of movement begins to fade, and what remains is stillness, pure stillness. And in that stillness, something very important becomes clear. There is nothing you need to hold on to anymore, nothing you need to maintain, nothing you need to continue doing, because everything is already unfolding exactly as it should, naturally, gently, effortlessly. And as that understanding settles into your system, your mind becomes even quieter, your body becomes even heavier, your awareness becomes even softer, and sleep begins to feel less like something approaching and more like something already beginning, right here, right now, carrying you gently, without resistance, into deeper rest. And as you continue to drift, you may begin to notice something very gentle forming around you, not as a physical sensation, but as an inner feeling, a sense of safety growing quietly, steadily, almost like a soft, invisible presence wrapping itself around your entire awareness, not holding you tightly, not restricting you, but supporting you in the most effortless way possible. And this sense of safety does not arrive suddenly. It builds slowly, layer by layer, breath by breath, as if your nervous system is carefully checking, quietly confirming, yes, it is okay now. I can relax a little more. I can soften a little more. I do not need to stay alert anymore. And in that quiet confirmation, something inside you begins to release even deeper. Because so much of the tension in life does not come from what is happening right now. It comes from what the body continues to hold even after everything has already passed. And now, here, in this stillness, your body is finally being given permission to stop holding the echoes of the day. And as that permission spreads, you may begin to feel a soft expansion in your chest, not tightness, not pressure, but openness, as if your breathing space is becoming wider, more free, more natural. And each inhale seems to gently bring in calm, not forced calm, not imagined calm, but real physiological calm, settling into your system like a quiet wave. And each exhale carries away something subtle, a fragment of tension, a trace of effort, a leftover impression of holding. And over time, without any instruction, your breathing begins to take on a deeper rhythm that is slower than before, smoother than before, more continuous, more seamless, as if your body has now fully taken over the process, allowing you to step back from even the smallest effort. And in that stepping back, something very important begins to happen. Your awareness begins to shift position, not outward toward the world, but inward toward sensation, toward stillness, toward presence. And as this inward shift continues, the outside world begins to feel more distant, not gone, but less relevant, less sharp, less demanding, as if it is slowly fading into a background that no longer requires your participation, and in its place, your inner world becomes more present, more noticeable, more spacious, and in that spaciousness, thoughts begin to appear differently now. They are still there, but they no longer feel like commands. They no longer feel like urgency. They no longer feel like something you must follow. Instead, they feel like passing echoes, like faint impressions moving across a quiet surface. And you may notice something very important here. You are not resisting them, and you are not engaging with them. You are simply allowing them to pass. And in that allowing, something begins to change, because what you do not resist begins to lose its intensity, and what you do not feed begins to fade naturally. And so your mind starts to experience more gaps, more pauses, more spaces between thoughts, and in those spaces, something very subtle begins to emerge, a deeper silence, not empty silence, not blank silence, but rich silence, a live silence, a silence that feels like it has always been there, waiting beneath everything else. And as you become more aware of that silence, your nervous system responds again, this time more deeply, more fully, as if a switch inside you is slowly shifting from alert to rest, from active to recovery, from holding to letting go. And that shift is not something you do, it is something that happens to you, naturally, gently, without effort. And as it happens, your body begins to sink even more deeply into support, as if gravity has become softer, kinder, more nurturing, holding you in a way that feels completely safe, completely steady, completely reliable. And in that holding, your muscles begin to release further, not all at once, but in waves. First the face, softening, relaxing, letting go of expressions you did not even realize were still present. Then the jaw, unclenching, dropping, becoming heavy in the most peaceful way. Then the neck and shoulders, where so much of life's tension is often stored. And now they begin to soften in layers, each layer releasing another layer beneath it, until even the idea of holding tension feels distant. And as this release moves downward, your chest begins to open more, your breathing becomes more spacious, less restricted, more natural, as if your entire upper body is finally exhaling after a long day. And that exhale is not just breath, it is release, it is permission, it is surrender. And further down your abdomen softens, letting go of unconscious holding patterns, letting go of subtle bracing, letting go of emotional residue stored quietly within. And then your hips, your legs, your feet, each part becoming heavier, each part becoming calmer, each part becoming more grounded in stillness, until your entire body feels like one continuous field of relaxation. And within that field, your awareness begins to shift again, this time more noticeably, as if you are no longer fully anchored to the surface of wakefulness, but gently suspended between waking and sleep, floating in a space that is neither fully active nor fully unconscious, but something in between, a threshold state, a liminal space, where healing often begins, where the mind begins to reorganize itself, where the body begins to repair itself, where the nervous system finally gets permission to fully rest. And as you remain in this threshold, you may begin to feel your thoughts becoming even more distant, not because they are gone, but because they no longer have the same weight. They no longer pull you inward. They no longer define your experience, and so they begin to fade into the background, like distant echoes, like soft ripples dissolving into silence, and in their place there is only awareness, soft awareness, quiet awareness, awareness that is no longer focused sharply on anything, but gently spread across everything. And in that spread, you may begin to feel a sense of drifting, not movement in space, but movement in state, a gentle sinking into deeper calm, deeper softness, deeper stillness. And as you drift, even the idea of effort begins to fade, because effort belongs to wakefulness, and you are moving beyond that now, not suddenly, but gently, step by step, breath by breath, into something quieter, something deeper, something more restful than anything you have experienced today. And as this deeper calm continues to unfold, you may already begin to sense that sleep is no longer far away. It is not waiting in the distance. It is already beginning to surround you, already beginning to hold you, already beginning to carry you. And all you need to do now is continue allowing, continue softening, continue drifting into deeper and deeper rest. And as you continue to drift, you may begin to notice something very subtle happening now, something that does not arrive loudly or suddenly, but instead unfolds quietly, almost like a gentle sinking feeling within your entire system, as if the weight you have been carrying all day is no longer something you need to manage, but something that is slowly, safely being taken care of by stillness itself. And in that stillness, you may feel a soft shift in your awareness, not a movement outward, but inward, deeper inward, as if your attention is no longer interested in the surface level of thoughts or sounds, but is instead naturally drawn towards something quieter, something more stable, something more restful. And you do not need to guide this shift, because it is not something you are doing. It is something that is happening on its own, something your body has been preparing for since the very beginning of this experience. And as that preparation completes itself, you may begin to feel your entire system responding, almost like a long exhale that has been held for far too long, finally being released, slowly, gently, without resistance. And in that release, your body begins to feel heavier once again. But this heaviness is not discomfort. It is not pressure. It is support, deep support, the kind that tells your nervous system it is safe to stop being alert, safe to stop scanning, safe to stop holding. And as that safety settles in more deeply, your breathing continues its natural rhythm, in and out, slow, steady, effortless. And with each cycle of breath, something inside you softens just a little more, not because you are trying, but because there is nothing left to resist. And in that absence of resistance, relaxation deepens naturally. And as relaxation deepens, your thoughts begin to change their shape again. They are still present, but now they feel less like structured ideas and more like passing impressions, like soft fragments of awareness floating through a quiet space. And you are no longer reaching for them. You are no longer holding on to them. You are simply watching them pass, or perhaps not even watching, just allowing them to move through you without interruption. And in that allowing, something very important begins to happen. The mind begins to lose its urgency, not all at once, but gradually, like a tide slowly retreating from the shore, leaving behind more and more open space, more and more silence, more and more stillness. And in that stillness, you may begin to feel a deeper sense of separation from the noise of thinking, not separation in a lonely way, but separation in a freeing way, like stepping out of a busy room into a quiet night, like moving from noise into softness, like shifting from effort into ease. And in that ease, your awareness begins to expand, not outward, but inward, as if your inner world is becoming more spacious, more open, more undefined. And in that openness, everything begins to feel less structured, less rigid, less fixed. Even your sense of time begins to soften. Seconds feel less like units and more like waves, flowing gently into one another, without interruption, without pressure, without urgency. And in that flow, your body continues to respond, muscles releasing further, breathing slowing further, internal systems settling further, as if every part of you is gradually agreeing to the same message. It is safe now, I can rest now, I do not need to hold anymore. And that agreement spreads through you, quietly, deeply, systematically, from your head down through your neck, your shoulders, your chest, your arms, your hands, your abdomen, your hips, your legs, all the way to your feet, until your entire body feels unified in stillness, one continuous field of calm, one continuous field of relaxation, one continuous field of surrender. And within that field, something begins to change again. Your awareness becomes softer, less focused, more diffuse, as if the edges of your mind are gently dissolving into the space around you. And in that dissolving, there is no fear, only ease, only quiet, only a very deep sense of letting go. And as you let go more fully, you may begin to feel a gentle drifting sensation, not physical movement, but internal movement, a sense that you are no longer anchored firmly to wakefulness, but are instead floating between layers of awareness, sometimes aware, sometimes less aware, sometimes thinking, sometimes simply being, and all of it feels perfectly natural, because nothing here requires effort anymore, nothing here requires control anymore. And in that realization, something very deep within you begins to soften. A final layer of holding, releasing, a final layer of tension, dissolving, a final layer of resistance, disappearing, and what remains underneath all of it is stillness, pure stillness, not empty, not dull, but deeply alive, deeply quiet, deeply peaceful. And as you rest in that stillness, you may begin to notice that even your sense of trying to stay awake is fading, not because you are losing control, but because control is no longer needed, and something deeper is now guiding you, something quieter than thought, something softer than intention, something more natural than effort, and that something is sleep itself, gently approaching, not as a sudden arrival, but as a gradual unfolding, like a soft wave rising in the distance, like a gentle tide moving closer, like a quiet invitation you do not need to respond to, because you are already moving toward it. And as that movement continues, you may begin to feel your awareness becoming more dreamlike, less structured, more fluid, as if the boundary between thinking and resting is slowly dissolving, and in that dissolving, everything becomes softer, everything becomes slower, everything becomes quieter, and you are no longer holding on to anything at all, not your thoughts, not your breath, not even your sense of direction, because there is no direction needed here, only drifting, only allowing, only resting. And as you continue to rest in this drifting, something very natural begins to happen. Sleep begins to take over, not suddenly, not forcefully, but gently, completely, effortlessly, carrying you now deeper and deeper into rest. And as your awareness begins to blur gently at the edges, you may notice something very quiet happening inside you, something that does not feel like a change at first, but more like a soft dissolving, as if the sharp lines of thinking are no longer holding their shape as clearly as before. And you do not need to interpret this. You do not need to analyze it, because this is not a mental process anymore. This is a letting go process, a deep, natural, physical mental unwinding that happens when the system finally feels safe enough to soften completely. And as that softening continues, you may notice that your sense of focus is no longer fixed in one place. It is no longer sharp, no longer directed, no longer trying to follow anything. Instead, it begins to spread out, like mist slowly expanding across a quiet landscape, not covering anything, just gently softening everything it touches. And in that soft expansion, thoughts still appear, but they are no longer structured in the same way. They are no longer forming clear pathways. They are more like fragments, faint impressions, half-formed echoes, appearing for a moment, and then quietly dissolving without effort, without resistance, without needing your attention. And you may begin to notice something very important here. You are no longer following them in the same way, not because you are trying not to, but because something deeper in you is no longer interested in holding on to them, and that disinterest, that quiet natural letting go, is what creates space, more space between thoughts, more silence between moments, more softness in awareness itself, and in that softness, your inner world begins to feel less defined, less structured, less rigid, as if everything is gently melting into a more fluid state of being. And in this fluidity, there is a very subtle sensation of drifting, not physical movement, but a shift in state, as if your awareness is no longer anchored to wakefulness in a fixed way, but is instead gently suspended, floating between clarity and sleep, between awareness and rest, between thought and silence. And you do not need to decide where you are, because the boundaries are becoming less important now, less noticeable, less relevant, and as those boundaries soften, your body continues its quiet response, because the body always follows the mind, and when the mind becomes softer, the body naturally follows into softness. So you may begin to feel your muscles releasing even more deeply, not in isolated areas, but everywhere at once, as if a wave of relaxation is moving through your entire system, from the smallest muscles in your face, to the deepest muscles in your back, to the quiet tension in your chest, to the subtle holding in your stomach, all beginning to loosen, all beginning to release, all beginning to melt into stillness. And in that melting, there is no effort, no force, no direction, only natural unfolding, like ice slowly turning into water, like heavy fog settling into calm air, like the body remembering how to stop holding itself so tightly. And as your body releases more deeply, your breathing follows again, becoming slower, softer, more effortless, almost as if breathing is happening beneath your awareness now, not controlled, not managed, just occurring, naturally, steadily, and each breath carries you further inward, not toward sleep yet, but toward the threshold of sleep, that quiet in-between space where everything begins to lose definition, where thinking becomes less structured, where awareness becomes less sharp, where rest begins to take over. And as you remain in that threshold, you may notice your sense of time beginning to shift again, not disappearing, but loosening, as if moments are no longer separated into clear units, but are instead flowing into one another, softly, continuously, without interruption. And in that continuity, something very deep begins to stabilize within you, a sense of not needing to go anywhere, not needing to become anything, not needing to reach anything, because everything is already here, everything is already enough, everything is already unfolding exactly as it should. And as that sense of enoughness settles into your system, your awareness becomes even softer, almost as if the edges of your perception are gently dissolving, not fading away completely, but becoming less distinct, less defined, more open, more spacious. And in that spaciousness, thoughts feel even further away now, like distant echoes, like faint movements behind a curtain of stillness, and you are no longer turning toward them. You are no longer engaging with them. You are simply allowing them to exist, without importance, without weight, without direction, and in that allowing, something very peaceful begins to emerge, a deeper silence, a more stable silence, a silence that feels like it is not something created, but something revealed, as if it has always been there underneath everything else, and now it is finally becoming noticeable. And as you rest in that silence, your body continues to respond in its own quiet way, sinking deeper, settling further, releasing more completely, as if every system within you is slowly stepping down from activity, not abruptly, but gently, like lights dimming one by one in a quiet room, until everything feels softer, warmer, quieter, and in that quiet, your awareness begins to drift again, not outward, not upward, but inward, into a deeper layer of calm, where everything feels slower, more fluid, more dreamlike, and even the act of noticing begins to soften, as if awareness itself is no longer trying to hold anything tightly, and in that soft awareness there is a gentle sensation of floating, not above anything, not below anything, but within something, a field of calm, a field of stillness, a field of quiet presence, and in that field you may begin to feel something very important, that there is nothing left to do, nothing left to hold, nothing left to maintain, because everything is already happening exactly as it needs to happen, naturally, gently, effortlessly, and as that understanding settles in, your system responds again, deeper relaxation, deeper softening, deeper surrender, as if every remaining layer of holding is now ready to release. And as it releases, something very subtle begins to happen. The boundary between wakefulness and sleep begins to dissolve, not suddenly, but gradually, like mist blending into night, like awareness blending into silence, like thought blending into stillness. And in that blending, you are no longer clearly in one state. You are moving, transitioning, sinking into something quieter, something softer, something more peaceful than anything that requires effort. And all you need to do now is allow this movement, allow this sinking, allow this transition, because sleep is no longer far away. It is already here, gently holding you, softly carrying you, deeper and deeper rest. And as feeling becomes everything, you may begin to notice a very quiet shift in the way your awareness is functioning now. Not as something thinking about the experience, not as something analyzing it, but as something simply being within it, as if the boundary between you and the experience is becoming softer, more fluid, less defined. And in that softening, sensation begins to take the lead, not thoughts, not logic, but feeling, pure feeling. And you do not need to understand this shift, because it is not meant to be understood intellectually. It is meant to be experienced gently, naturally, without effort. And as you allow yourself to stay with feeling, you may begin to notice warmth spreading in subtle ways through your body, not necessarily hot, not necessarily cold, but comforting, like a quiet internal presence that is gently moving through you, reminding every part of your system that it is safe to relax even more. And this warmth does not arrive all at once. It spreads slowly, like dawn light moving across a quiet landscape, like soft water filling empty space without force, like calm itself becoming physical inside your awareness. And as this calmness takes on a felt form, your body begins to respond even more deeply. Muscles that were holding even the smallest traces of tension begin to release further, not in a noticeable single moment, but in continuous soft waves, one layer, then another, each release creating more space inside you, more softness, more ease, and in that ease, your breathing continues its natural rhythm, in and out, slow, steady, effortless. And now, even the awareness of breathing begins to soften, as if the breath is no longer something you are observing closely, but something happening within a much larger field of stillness, a field that holds everything gently, without pressure, without expectation. And as you rest in that field, You may begin to notice that thoughts are no longer forming complete structures. They are becoming fragmented, incomplete, like distant echoes trying to form shape but dissolving before they fully arrive. And you are no longer engaging with them, not because you are resisting, but because there is nothing in you that needs to hold on to them anymore. And in that release, something very subtle begins to happen. Your awareness begins to sink slightly deeper, not downward physically, but inwardly, into a quieter layer of experience, where sensation becomes more dominant than thought, where feeling becomes more important than interpretation, where presence becomes more real than narrative. And in that layer, everything feels slower, not in a forced way, but in a natural way, like time itself is stretching gently around you, creating space, creating softness, creating room for stillness to expand. And as stillness expands, your nervous system responds again, because the body is always listening, always adjusting, always moving toward balance when given permission. And right now, it is receiving that permission fully. So your shoulders soften even more, dropping in a way that feels almost like surrender, not emotional surrender, but physical surrender. The kind that happens when the body realizes it no longer needs to stay alert. And as your shoulders soften, your chest follows, opening gently, allowing breath to flow more freely, more naturally, more quietly. And in that quiet flow, your abdomen releases subtle layers of holding, softening from the inside out, letting go of tension that was never consciously noticed, but always present beneath awareness. And as this release continues downward, your hips, your legs, your feet all begin to feel heavier. But this heaviness is not discomfort, it is grounding, it is stability. It is the feeling of being fully supported without needing to hold yourself up anymore. And in that support, something very important begins to happen. The need for control begins to fade, not abruptly, but gently, like a soft turning inward, like a quiet acceptance, like the system saying, I can stop now, I can rest now. And as that acceptance spreads, your mind begins to quiet even further. Thoughts that once felt important now feel distant, almost irrelevant, almost unnecessary, and in their place there is space, wide, open, calm space, and in that space, feeling becomes more dominant than thought. You begin to feel rather than think, sense rather than analyze, be rather than do. And this shift is profound because it moves you from mental activity into pure presence. And in pure presence, everything becomes simpler, everything becomes softer, everything becomes quieter. And as you rest in that simplicity, you may begin to feel a gentle floating sensation, not physical floating, but inner floating, as if your awareness is no longer anchored tightly to the surface of wakefulness, but gently suspended within calm, held by something unseen but deeply felt. And in that holding, there is no fear, only ease, only safety, only quiet surrender. And as surrender deepens, your breathing becomes even more subtle, so subtle that it feels like breath is happening beneath awareness itself, not observed, not controlled, just occurring naturally like a background rhythm of life itself. And with each breath, you sink further into feeling, not away from reality, but deeper into it, into a quieter version of it, where everything feels softer at the edges, less defined, more fluid, and in that fluidity, time continues to stretch, moments blending into one another without separation, without interruption, without urgency, and in that timelessness, your entire system begins to recalibrate, like a slow return to balance. like a gentle resetting of internal rhythms, like a deep remembering of what rest actually feels like. And you do not need to guide this process because it is already happening automatically, naturally, intelligently. And as it continues, something very quiet begins to emerge, a sense that you are no longer holding on to anything at all, not thoughts, not sensations, not even the sense of being someone who is resting, because even identity begins to soften here, becoming less rigid, less defined, more spacious, more open, and in that openness there is only feeling, pure feeling, soft feeling, endless feeling, and that feeling is not overwhelming, it is soothing, it is grounding, it is deeply restful. And as you remain within it, you may begin to notice something very subtle happening at the edge of awareness, a gentle pull, a soft invitation, a quiet movement towards something deeper still, towards sleep, not sudden, not forced, but naturally unfolding, like a tide that has been rising all along without you noticing. And now it is here, surrounding you, carrying you, holding you, and all that remains is to continue letting go, continuing to soften, continuing to drift into deeper and deeper rest. And as rest becomes deeper, you may begin to notice something very quiet happening in the background of your awareness, something that does not interrupt you, something that does not demand attention, but something that gently supports you as you go further inward. Because right now, your body is no longer just relaxing. It is reorganizing itself into rest, a deeper kind of rest, the kind that does not just feel calm on the surface, but reaches into the systems beneath everything. Your breathing, your heartbeat, your nervous system, your thoughts, your sense of time, all of it slowly adjusting, all of it quietly shifting, all of it gently moving toward balance. And you do not need to guide any of this, because your body already knows exactly how to do it. It has done it before, every night you have ever truly slept deeply, and now it is remembering again. And as that remembering unfolds, your breathing becomes even more natural, more unforced, more effortless, as if the breath is no longer something you are doing, but something that is happening through you, in and out, slow, steady, quiet. And each exhale seems to carry you a little further away from effort, a little further away from thinking, a little further away from the need to remain alert. And in that distance from effort, something very important begins to happen. The mind begins to soften its structure, not collapse, not disappear, but loosen, like a grip slowly opening, like tension melting from something that no longer needs to be held. And thoughts, if they appear at all now, feel different. They are no longer forming clear narratives. They are no longer building stories. They are no longer pulling you forward. Instead, they feel like faint impressions, like soft echoes passing through a much larger silence, and you are no longer following them. Not because you are resisting, but because there is no longer any need to follow them. And in that space of non-following, something very subtle opens, a deeper silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of stillness. Stillness that feels like it has been there all along, beneath everything, supporting everything, waiting for attention that never fully arrived until now. And as your awareness rests in that stillness, your body continues its gentle descent, not downward physically, but inwardly, layer by layer, like sinking through levels of softness, each level quieter than the last, each level slower than the last, each level more peaceful than the last. And as you pass through these layers, your muscles continue to release in subtle waves, not all at once, but gradually, continuously, naturally. First the face, softening, letting go of expression, letting go of subtle tension, letting go of everything it has been holding unconsciously. Then the jaw, dropping slightly, relaxing completely, as if even the act of holding structure is no longer necessary. Then the neck and shoulders, where so much of the day's weight often collects. And now that weight begins to dissolve, not pushed away, but released, like something gently melting from the inside out. And further down, your chest begins to open more, not physically expanding in effort, but softening in sensation, allowing breath to move without restriction, without resistance, without control. And in that openness, your breathing becomes even more fluid, more continuous, more seamless, as if your body has entered a rhythm that requires no awareness to maintain. And that rhythm carries you deeper and deeper into calm. And as calm deepens, your awareness begins to shift again, not outward, but inward, as if your attention is no longer interested in the external world at all, but is instead drawn towards something quieter, something more subtle, something more essential. And in that inward pull, the outside world begins to feel more distant, not gone, but less important, less sharp, less relevant, as if it is gently fading into a background that no longer requires engagement. And in its place, your inner world becomes more spacious, more open, more undefined. And in that openness, something very gentle begins to emerge, a sense of floating, not physical floating, but awareness floating, as if your consciousness is no longer fixed in one point, but suspended softly within stillness, held by nothing, and yet supported by everything. And in that paradox there is peace, a deep and quiet peace, one that does not require explanation, one that does not require effort, one that simply is. And as you rest in that peace, your thoughts become even quieter, not because they are being removed, but because they are no longer needed. And so they fade naturally, like waves becoming smaller as the ocean becomes still. And in their fading, the silence becomes more noticeable again, not empty, but full, full of space, full of presence, full of stillness. And as you rest in that stillness, something very important begins to happen. Your sense of time begins to soften even more, not disappearing, but stretching, as if moments are no longer separate, but flowing into one another, without interruption, without urgency, without structure. And in that flow, your entire system begins to settle into a deeper state of coherence, everything aligning, everything slowing, everything softening, as if your body and mind are finally moving in the same direction, toward rest, toward stillness, toward recovery. And you may begin to notice now that even the idea of effort feels distant, like something belonging to another state entirely, another time, another layer of awareness, because here effort is not required, only allowing, only drifting, only being carried. And as that allowing deepens, your awareness begins to blur again. Confusion, but in softness, like the edges of perception gently dissolving into calm. And in that softness, something very subtle begins to take over. A deeper intelligence within your body, guiding you, smoothing everything, slowing everything, preparing everything for sleep. And you do not need to engage with this process, because it is already happening, naturally, quietly, effortlessly. And as it continues, you may begin to feel a gentle sense of sinking, not into something heavy, but into something supportive, like falling into warm water, like resting into soft night air, like being held by stillness itself. And in that holding, everything becomes quieter, everything becomes slower, everything becomes softer, until even the boundary between wakefulness and sleep begins to thin. Not break, not disappear, but dissolve gently, like mist blending into night. And in that dissolving, you are no longer fully awake, but not yet fully asleep. You are in the threshold, the in-between, the place where letting go becomes effortless, where rest becomes natural, where sleep begins to gently take over. And all you need to do now is continue to drift, continue to soften, continue to allow, as deeper and deeper rest carries you forward into sleep. And as you continue to drift, you may begin to notice something very gentle happening now at the edges of your awareness, something that feels like a soft crossing, not a sudden change, not a sharp shift, but a gradual fading of one state into another, as if wakefulness itself is no longer holding its shape as firmly as before. And you do not need to mark this moment, you do not need to define it, because this is not something the thinking mind fully understands. This is something the body recognizes, something the nervous system allows, something the deeper part of you already knows how to do. And as that deeper knowing takes over, you may begin to feel a very subtle sensation, like floating between two worlds, not fully here in wakefulness and not fully yet in sleep, but somewhere in between, a soft in-between space where everything feels lighter, softer, less structured, and in that softness, your awareness begins to change its quality, not sharp anymore, not focused tightly, but wide, gentle, diffused, as if you are no longer looking at experience directly, but resting inside it. And as that resting continues, thoughts may still appear, but they feel different now. They no longer form complete patterns. They no longer build strong meaning. They no longer pull you forward into mental engagement. Instead, they feel like fragments, like distant echoes of thinking, like faint impressions passing through a quiet field, and you are not following them anymore. Not because you are stopping yourself, but because something inside you has already stepped away from needing to follow, and in that stepping away, something very important begins to emerge, a deeper quiet, not forced quiet, not artificial quiet, but natural quiet, the kind that appears when everything unnecessary begins to fall away on its own. And as that quiet becomes more present, your breathing continues its slow rhythm, but now it feels even more effortless than before, almost as if the breath is happening beneath awareness, not observed, not controlled, just unfolding in and out, soft, slow, steady, and each exhale feels like a gentle lowering, a gentle sinking, a gentle release into something deeper. And in that deeper space, your body begins to respond again, because the body is always listening, always adjusting, always aligning with the state of mind. And right now, the state is becoming quieter, so the body follows, shoulders soften even more, noticing that there is no longer anything to carry, no longer anything to hold, no longer anything to prepare for. In that realization, they let go, not dramatically, but naturally, like something finally being allowed to rest after a long day of holding tension, and that release spreads downward into the chest, where breathing becomes even more spacious, even more open, even more free, as if the entire upper body is now gently exhaling all at once, not as a sound, but as a feeling, a deep internal release. And further down, the abdomen softens again, letting go of subtle holding patterns, letting go of unconscious bracing, letting go of emotional residue stored quietly beneath awareness. And that softening continues down through the hips, the legs, the knees, the feet, until your entire body feels like it is no longer separate parts, but one continuous field of relaxation, one continuous wave of stillness, one continuous presence of ease, and in that ease, something very subtle begins to shift again. Your sense of boundaries begins to blur, not physically, but experientially, as if the edge between your body and the space around it is becoming less defined, less rigid, more fluid, and in that fluidity, there is a feeling of expansion, not outward expansion, but inward expansion, as if your awareness is no longer confined to a tight center, but gently spreading into the space around you, soft, wide, open. And in that openness, everything becomes less separate, less divided, less structured, as if reality itself is becoming softer at the edges. And in that softness, you may begin to notice a very important shift. The idea of effort begins to fade, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, energetically, as if even the concept of trying no longer feels relevant here. And in its place, there is only allowing, only drifting, only being carried. And that carrying is not forceful. It is not directional. It is not demanding. It is gentle, like a tide moving without urgency, like a river flowing without resistance, like something natural guiding you deeper without needing permission. And as you are carried, your awareness begins to sink again, not downward physically, but inwardly into a quieter layer of experience where everything feels more distant, more softened, more dreamlike, and in that dreamlike quality, time itself begins to shift again. Seconds feel less defined. Moments feel less separated. Everything blends, everything flows, everything softens into continuity. And in that continuity, your nervous system begins to deepen its rest response, because now there is no need for alertness, no need for vigilance, no need for readiness. And in the absence of those needs, something very deep within you begins to recalibrate, like a system slowly turning down its intensity, like a light dimming gradually, like a machine finally switching into rest mode after a long day. And in that rest mode, your thoughts become even quieter, not because you are pushing them away, but because they are simply no longer needed. And so they fade, not completely, but enough to no longer define your experience. And in their fading, silence becomes more noticeable again, not empty silence, but full silence, a silence that feels like it has always been present, even beneath noise, even beneath thinking, even beneath activity, and now it is finally coming forward. And as that silence comes forward, something very gentle begins to happen. A deeper drift, a deeper sinking, a deeper letting go, as if you are no longer resting on the surface of awareness, but descending gently beneath it into a quieter layer where everything is slower, softer, more peaceful. And in that peaceful layer, your sense of self begins to soften again, not disappearing, but becoming less defined, less fixed, more fluid, as if you are no longer confined to a single point of identity, but expanding into a wider field of calm awareness. And in that field, there is no need to hold anything, no need to maintain anything, no need to continue anything, because everything is already unfolding exactly as it should, naturally, quietly, effortlessly. And as that understanding settles in, your body responds once more, sinking deeper, releasing further, softening completely, as if every remaining trace of holding is now dissolving. And as it dissolves, You may begin to feel something very important. Sleep is no longer something approaching. It is something already beginning, softly, quietly, gently, surrounding you, holding you, carrying you, and all that remains is to continue drifting into deeper and deeper rest. And as you descend gently, you may begin to notice something very subtle unfolding now, something that does not feel like movement in the usual sense, but more like a deep internal settling, as if every part of your system is slowly finding its place, slowly aligning, slowly releasing into a state that requires no effort to maintain. And in this settling, there is no urgency left, no pressure, no expectation, only a soft continuation, a quiet unfolding, a gradual easing into something even deeper than relaxation. And you do not need to guide this process, because what is happening now is not guided by thought. It is guided by nature, by the body's own intelligence, by the nervous system's own rhythm of restoration. And as that natural intelligence takes over more fully, you may begin to notice your breathing becoming even more subtle, so subtle that it feels almost like the breath is happening on its own, beneath awareness, without instruction, without effort, in and out, slow, soft, barely noticeable, and yet deeply present, like a quiet rhythm holding you gently in place. And with each exhale, something inside you continues to release, not in one big moment, but in continuous waves, small releases, layer after layer, each one carrying you a little deeper, a little softer, a little further away from effort. And in that distance from effort, your body begins to feel even heavier. But this heaviness is not resistance. It is support, deep support, like being held by something larger than yourself, something steady, something safe, something completely reliable. And in that holding, your muscles begin to let go more fully, not selectively, but globally, as if your entire body is now receiving the same message. It is safe now. You can stop holding, and that message spreads quietly, systematically, from your head down through your neck, your shoulders, your chest, your arms, your hands, your abdomen, your hips, your legs, your feet, until your entire body feels like a single continuous field of release, a single continuous field of softness, a single continuous field of stillness. And within that stillness, something very important begins to happen. Your sense of separation begins to soften, not disappear, but loosen, as if the boundary between you and the space around you is no longer as sharp as before. And in that loosening, there is a feeling of expansion, not outward expansion, but inward spaciousness, as if your awareness is gently opening, widening, becoming less confined. And in that openness, everything feels less dense, less structured, less defined. Even thoughts, when they appear, feel distant now, like faint impressions moving across a wide, silent background. And you are not engaging with them, not because you are trying not to, but because there is no longer anything in you that needs to hold on to them. And in that absence of holding, something very quiet emerges, a deeper silence, not empty silence, but full silence, a silence that feels alive, a silence that feels supportive, a silence that feels like it has always been there, beneath everything else. And as you rest in that silence, your awareness begins to shift again, not outward, but inward, deeper inward, into a quieter layer of experience where everything feels slower, softer, more fluid. And in that fluidity, time itself begins to stretch. Moments no longer feel separate. They begin to blend, flow, merge into one continuous experience of stillness. And in that continuity, your nervous system begins to deepen its relaxation response even further, because now there is no need for alertness, no need for vigilance, no need for control. And in that absence, something within you begins to recalibrate, like a system gently powering down unnecessary activity, like a soft dimming of internal noise, like a quiet transition into restoration mode. And as that transition continues, your thoughts begin to quiet further, not because you are forcing silence, but because silence is naturally taking over the space where thinking once was, and so thoughts fade, not abruptly, but gently, like ripples disappearing into calm water. And in their fading, something very stable remains: presence, simple presence, uncomplicated presence, the feeling of being here without needing anything more. And as that presence deepens, you may begin to feel a subtle sense of drifting again. Not physical movement, but internal movement, a soft sinking, a gentle descent into something quieter, something deeper, something more peaceful than anything effort-based awareness can reach. And as you descend, your body continues to respond, shoulders dropping even more, chest softening further, breath becoming quieter, muscles releasing completely, as if every part of you is now fully agreeing with rest, fully participating in stillness, fully surrendering to calm. And in that surrender, there is no loss, only relief, deep relief, like finally putting down something you did not realize you were still carrying. And as that relief spreads, your awareness becomes even softer, more diffuse, more dreamlike, as if the edges of perception are gently dissolving into calm. And in that calm, you may begin to notice that even the sense of direction is fading, because there is nowhere to go anymore, nothing to reach, nothing to achieve, nothing to hold, only this unfolding, only this drifting, only this deepening stillness. And as you remain here, something very subtle begins to change again. The boundary between wakefulness and sleep begins to thin, not suddenly, but gradually, like mist blending into night, like awareness blending into silence, like effort blending into rest. And in that blending, you are no longer fully awake, but not yet fully asleep. You are in the threshold, the in-between space, the space where letting go becomes effortless, where awareness becomes softer than thought, where rest begins to take over completely. And in that space, something very important is happening. Your system is transitioning from activity to restoration, from holding to releasing, from waking consciousness into sleep. And all you need to do now is continue allowing, continue softening, continue drifting, as deeper and deeper rest carries you gently into sleep. And now, as you settle even more deeply into this quiet space, something very gentle begins to shift again within your awareness, not as a disturbance, not as a change that pulls you back toward wakefulness, but as a deeper surrender into it. Because at this level of rest, even the idea of going deeper begins to soften. It is no longer something you are doing. It is something that is happening through you. And as that realization gently forms, your entire system responds, not with thought, but with feeling, a feeling of letting go that is so natural, so unforced, so effortless, that it almost feels like you have been practicing it your whole life without knowing. And now, finally, your body remembers how to do it fully, and in that remembering, something very quiet begins to spread through your entire being. A stillness that is not static, but alive. A stillness that is not empty, but full of space. A stillness that feels like it has depth, layers, and softness that continues endlessly inward. And as you rest in that depth, your breathing becomes even more delicate, almost like it is no longer a process you are aware of, but something that is simply happening in the background of calm, in and out, so soft, so slow, so effortless, and each breath feels like it is not just sustaining you, but carrying you deeper into relaxation, deeper into quiet, deeper into a state where even thinking feels unnecessary. And in that unnecessary space, thoughts begin to fade even further, not because they are being removed, but because they are no longer being fed, no longer being followed, no longer being engaged, and so they dissolve gently, naturally, like footprints disappearing into soft sand as the tide rises, and in their disappearance, something very important becomes more visible. Silence, not ordinary silence, but deep silence, a silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something far more subtle, something steady, something supportive, something that feels like the foundation of all experience. And as you rest in that silence, your awareness begins to shift again, not outward, but inward, deeper inward, as if you are moving beneath the surface layer of consciousness into something quieter, more spacious, more fluid. And in that fluidity, your sense of self begins to soften again, not dissolve, but loosen, as if the structure that defines you is no longer rigid, but gently flexible, like something that no longer needs to be tightly held in place. And in that loosening, everything feels more open, less fixed, less defined. Even your perception of your body begins to change. It feels less like separate parts, and more like one continuous field of sensation, a field of softness, a field of calm, a field of stillness that holds everything equally. And in that holding, something very subtle begins to happen. Your attention begins to drift, not away, but inward, like sinking through layers of quiet, each layer softer than the last, each layer slower than the last, each layer more peaceful than the last. And as you pass through these layers, your mind continues to quiet further, not through effort, but through absence of need. There is nothing left to solve, nothing left to analyze, nothing left to hold. And so thinking becomes unnecessary, and in that unnecessary space, thinking fades, not completely, but enough to no longer define your experience. And in its place, there is presence, pure presence, simple presence, the feeling of being here without needing anything more. And as that presence deepens, something very gentle begins to unfold, a sense of drifting, not physical drifting, but state drifting, as if your awareness is no longer anchored in wakefulness, but is slowly moving into something softer, something more dreamlike, something more fluid. And in that fluidity, time begins to lose its structure again. Moments no longer feel separate. They begin to merge, flow, blend, like soft waves meeting without collision. And in that merging, your nervous system continues to deepen its rest, because now there is no need for alertness, no need for readiness, no need for control. And in that absence, everything within you begins to recalibrate, slowly, quietly, naturally, like a system returning to its most balanced state. And as that balance restores itself, your body releases even more deeply, shoulders becoming heavier in the most peaceful way, chest becoming softer and more open, abdomen releasing unconscious tension, legs sinking fully into support, feet feeling grounded and still, until your entire body feels like a single unified experience of calm, And within that calm, something begins to shift again. The boundary between inside and outside begins to blur, not disappear, but soften, as if everything is becoming part of one continuous field of awareness. And in that field, there is no separation, only experience, only presence, only stillness. And as you rest in that stillness, your awareness becomes even softer, almost dreamlike now, as if you are no longer fully observing anything, but simply existing within it. And in that existence, everything becomes quieter, everything becomes slower, everything becomes more gentle, and then something very subtle begins to happen. A pull, a shift, a natural movement toward deeper rest, not sudden, not forceful, but inevitable, like gravity becoming softer, like night gently taking over the sky, like awareness slowly dissolving into sleep itself. And in that dissolution, you are no longer holding on to wakefulness at all. It is already fading, already loosening, already becoming something distant. And what remains is softness, pure softness, soft awareness, soft breathing, soft drifting. And all you need to do now is allow this softness to continue, allow this drifting to deepen, allow this sleep to gently take over as you move effortlessly, completely, into deeper and deeper rest. And now, as everything continues to soften even further, there is a very quiet transition happening within you, so subtle that it does not announce itself, so gentle that it does not interrupt anything, and yet so deep that it changes the entire quality of your experience. Because at this point, you are no longer just relaxing, you are slipping, not in a sudden way, but in a continuous, uninterrupted, natural flow, as if wakefulness is no longer something you are inside of, but something you are gently moving beyond. And you do not need to resist this movement, because there is nothing unstable about it, nothing uncertain, nothing unfamiliar to your system. In fact, this is something your body knows deeply. This is something your nervous system has been preparing for all along. Every moment of relaxation until now has been leading here, and now you are simply allowing it to complete itself. And as that completion unfolds, your breathing becomes even more quiet, so quiet that it almost feels like it is happening without your awareness, not controlled, not observed, just flowing in and out like a soft rhythm beneath everything, a rhythm that does not require participation, only presence. And even presence itself is becoming softer now, less defined, less focused, more like a wide field of calm awareness that holds everything without effort. And in that field, thoughts continue to fade, not abruptly, but gradually, like distant echoes dissolving into open space. They no longer form complete ideas. They no longer build direction. They no longer carry urgency. They simply appear and dissolve like waves losing strength before reaching the shore. And you are no longer engaging with them. Not because you are trying not to, but because something deeper in you has already stepped beyond the need to engage. In that stepping beyond, something very important begins to emerge. A deeper silence, not empty silence, but full silence, a silence that feels like it has texture, like it has depth, like it has presence, a silence that feels like it is holding you rather than surrounding you. And as you rest within that silence, your body begins to release even further, because now there is nothing left to maintain, nothing left to prepare for, nothing left to hold in readiness. And so the body responds in its own intelligent way. Shoulders soften completely, not just dropping, but melting, as if they have finally been given permission to stop carrying invisible weight. The chest becomes even more open, not expanded through effort, but freed through release. Breathing becomes less like a process and more like a background flow of calm. The abdomen lets go of deeper layers of unconscious holding, the kind of holding that was never noticed, but always present, and now it dissolves gently, quietly, naturally, down through the hips, the legs, the feet, until your entire body feels like it is no longer composed of separate parts, but one continuous sensation of stillness, one continuous field of ease, one continuous experience of letting go. And within that field, something begins to shift again. Your sense of being here begins to soften, not disappear, but loosen, as if the center of awareness is no longer fixed, but gently expanding, spreading, widening, until there is no clear boundary between you and the stillness you are resting in. And in that widening, everything feels less structured, less defined, less solid. Even your thoughts feel more like faint impressions now, almost like they belong to another layer of experience that is far away, and you are no longer following them, because there is nothing in you that needs to follow anything anymore. And in that absence of following, something very deep becomes more noticeable. Stillness, pure stillness, not static, not frozen, but alive in its own quiet way. A stillness that feels like it has always been present beneath everything else, even beneath thought, even beneath awareness, even beneath identity. And now, it is gently becoming the main experience. And as that stillness deepens, your awareness begins to shift again, not outward, but inward, deeper inward, as if you are sinking through layers of softness, each layer quieter than the last, each layer slower than the last, each layer more peaceful than the last. And in that sinking, something very important happens. The sense of time begins to loosen again. Moments no longer feel separate. They begin to merge, flow, blend, like gentle waves overlapping without resistance. And in that blending, your nervous system continues its deep restoration, because now there is no need for vigilance, no need for awareness in the active sense, no need for mental engagement, and in that absence, your entire system begins to recalibrate, slowly, softly, naturally, like a gentle return to its most balanced rhythm. And as that recalibration continues, your body sinks even deeper into support, not because it is falling, but because it is being held completely, safely, effortlessly, as if the surface beneath you has become more than physical support. It has become emotional support, energetic support, complete support. And in that support, something very subtle begins to change again. The boundary between wakefulness and sleep begins to thin, not break, not disappear suddenly, but dissolve gently, like mist blending into night, like awareness blending into silence, like effort blending into surrender. And in that dissolving, you are no longer fully awake, but not yet fully asleep. You are in the threshold, the in-between space, the space where everything becomes softer than thought, slower than memory, quieter than awareness itself. And in that space, something very natural takes over. Sleep begins to guide you, not as a force, but as a flow, not as a command, but as a return to stillness, a return to rest, a return to the deepest ease your system knows. And all you need to do now is continue allowing, continue drifting, continue softening as you move gently, completely, effortlessly into deeper and deeper sleep. And now, as you drift even deeper into this quiet unfolding, there is a very subtle change happening again, so soft that it does not disturb your rest, so natural that it does not need your attention, and so deep that it begins to carry you beyond the level of ordinary relaxation. Because at this stage, something important is happening within your entire system. You are no longer simply relaxing into sleep. You are transitioning through it, layer by layer, step by step, breath by breath, not as a process you are controlling, but as a process that is happening through you. And as that transition continues, your awareness begins to feel less like something sharp and focused, and more like something wide, soft, and gently diffused, as if your attention is no longer pointing in one direction, but spreading quietly across everything, without effort, without intention, without strain. And in that wide softness, thoughts continue to fade, not because they are being pushed away, but because they are no longer being fed, no longer being followed, no longer being strengthened by attention. And so they become lighter, more distant, more fragmented, like echoes dissolving into an expanding silence, and you are no longer engaging with them at all, not even slightly, because something deeper in you has already stepped into a quieter state, a state where thinking is no longer necessary, and in that absence of necessity, thinking begins to dissolve naturally, and what remains is something far more subtle, a deepening silence, not empty silence, but full silence, a silence that feels like it has weight, depth, and presence, a silence that feels like it is holding everything together without effort. And as you rest in that silence, your breathing continues its gentle rhythm, in and out, so slow, so soft, so effortless, that it feels almost like it is happening on its own, beneath awareness, beyond attention, like a background current of life carrying you gently forward. And each exhale feels like a deeper release, not just of air, but of identity, of effort, of mental structure, of everything that was still slightly held. And with each release, your body becomes heavier. But this heaviness is not burden, it is grounding, it is safety. It is the feeling of being fully supported by something you do not need to question, something you do not need to understand, something you can simply surrender into completely. And as that surrender deepens, your body begins to release even more layers of tension, not in isolated areas, but globally, across your entire system, as if every cell is now receiving the same instruction. Let go, and it does, quietly, naturally, effortlessly. First the face softens completely, letting go of expression, letting go of subtle tension, letting go of everything that was being held unconsciously. Then the jaw releases, dropping, relaxing, becoming heavy in the most peaceful way. Then the neck and shoulders soften further, as if the weight of the entire day is finally dissolving. Not carried anymore, not stored anymore, just released. And as this release continues downward, your chest opens gently, not through effort, but through letting go. Breathing becomes more spacious, more fluid, more natural, as if the entire upper body is exhaling at once. And further down, the abdomen softens into deeper calm, releasing hidden tension, releasing unconscious holding, releasing emotional residue that no longer needs to remain. And that softness continues down through your hips, your legs, your feet, until your entire body feels like it is no longer separate parts, but one continuous field of relaxation, one continuous wave of stillness, one continuous experience of ease. And within that ease, something very important begins to happen. Your sense of boundaries begins to blur again, not in confusion, but in softness, as if the edges of your awareness are gently dissolving into the space around you. And in that dissolution, everything feels more unified, less separated, less divided, more like one continuous experience rather than something happening to a you. And in that unity, your awareness begins to shift again, not outward, but inward, deeper inward, as if you are slowly descending through layers of calm, each layer quieter than the last, each layer softer than the last, each layer more peaceful than the last. And as you descend, time itself begins to lose its structure again. Moments no longer feel distinct. They begin to merge, flow, blend, like gentle waves overlapping endlessly without resistance. And in that flowing continuity, your nervous system enters a deeper phase of restoration. Because now there is no need for alertness, no need for vigilance, no need for control. And in that absence, everything within you begins to recalibrate, slowly, softly, naturally, like a system returning to its original balance, like a river finding its natural course again, like something deeply intelligent reorganizing you into rest. And as that restoration deepens, your thoughts become even quieter, almost fully fading now into the background of awareness, not removed but irrelevant, like distant shadows that no longer affect the light you are resting in. And what remains is presence, simple presence, pure presence, the feeling of being here without needing anything more. And as that presence deepens, something very gentle begins to unfold again, a deeper sinking, a deeper letting go, a deeper surrender into the natural rhythm of rest. And you may begin to notice that even awareness itself is becoming softer, less defined, less sharp, more like a gentle glow than a focus point. And in that glow, the sensation of drifting becomes stronger, not as movement, but as state, as if you are no longer anchored to wakefulness at all, but gently suspended within calm, held by nothing, and yet supported by everything. And in that paradox, there is peace, a peace that does not require understanding, a peace that does not require effort, a peace that simply is. And as you remain in that peace, something very subtle begins to happen. The boundary between wakefulness and sleep becomes thinner, more transparent, more delicate, as if it is no longer a line, but a soft mist. And that mist is slowly dissolving, not abruptly, but gently, completely. And in that dissolving, you are no longer fully awake, but not yet fully asleep. You are in the threshold, the in-between space, the space where everything becomes quieter than thought, slower than memory, softer than awareness itself. And in that space, something very natural takes over. Sleep begins to guide you completely, not as force, but as flow, not as direction, but as return, a return to stillness, a return to rest, a return to the deepest quiet your system has ever known. And all you need to do now is continue allowing, continue drifting, continue softening as you move gently, completely, effortlessly into deeper and deeper sleep. And now, as everything continues to soften, there is a very final kind of unfolding beginning to happen within you, not as an ending in a harsh or sudden way, but as a completion, a quiet completion, like something naturally reaching its deepest point, and then simply resting there. And you may notice even this idea of final begins to feel softer now, less like an ending and more like a return into something that has always been here, beneath every thought, beneath every sensation, beneath every moment of waking awareness. And now, as you settle into this return, your breathing continues, but it feels even more distant now, almost as if it is happening on its own, without observation, without participation, without effort, in and out, slow, soft, barely noticeable, and yet completely supporting you. And with each exhale, there is a deeper release happening, not of tension alone, but of everything that still remains slightly active within awareness, even the subtle need to stay aware, even the faint tendency to notice, even the smallest trace of effort. All of it begins to soften now, all of it begins to dissolve, and what remains is something very simple, very quiet, very deep, stillness, not empty stillness, but full stillness. Stillness that feels like it has always existed underneath everything, even underneath sound, even underneath thought, even underneath identity itself. And as you rest in that stillness, your body becomes even heavier. But this heaviness is not resistance. It is surrender, complete surrender, the kind of surrender that does not require decision, the kind of surrender that happens when there is nothing left to hold on to. And as that surrender deepens, your entire system begins to relax at its deepest possible level, not in layers anymore, but as one unified release, one continuous letting go, one uninterrupted descent into calm. And in that descent, thoughts continue to fade, but now they feel almost irrelevant, like distant echoes from another state of being. They no longer form meaning. They no longer form structure. They no longer form direction. They simply pass, without resistance, without engagement, without importance, and you are no longer following them at all, because there is nothing in you that needs to follow anything anymore. And in that absence of following, something very profound becomes clear. There is only silence now, not silence created by absence, but silence revealed when everything unnecessary falls away. And this silence is not blank, it is not empty, it is not nothing. It is something deeply alive, deeply stable, deeply present, a silence that feels like it is holding you, like it is surrounding you, like it is you. And as that silence deepens, your awareness begins to soften even further, not disappearing, but widening, becoming less concentrated, more diffused, like a soft field of presence that no longer has edges, no longer has boundaries, no longer has separation. And in that boundlessness, everything feels unified, everything feels connected, everything feels like one continuous experience of stillness. And in that stillness, time begins to dissolve again, not in a confusing way, but in a natural way, as if moments are no longer separate, as if there is no before or after, only now, only this, only being. And as that being deepens, something very subtle begins to shift, a final softening, a final letting go, a final release of everything that still had even the smallest trace of holding. And in that final release, there is no effort left anywhere in your system, not in your body, not in your mind, not in your awareness. Everything has already been released. Everything has already been softened. Everything has already been allowed to settle. And now, there is only resting, pure resting, complete resting. Resting that does not need to be maintained, resting that does not require attention, resting that simply continues on its own. In that continuation, something very gentle happens. The boundary between awareness and sleep disappears completely, not suddenly, not dramatically, but so softly that you may not even notice the moment it happens, because it does not feel like a crossing. It feels like a blending, like awareness melting into sleep, like sleep rising into awareness, until both become one continuous experience. And in that oneness, there is no longer a you observing rest. There is only rest itself. There is no longer a direction, only stillness. There is no longer a journey, only arrival. And that arrival is not somewhere else. It is here. It is now. It is this. And as you rest here, something very deep within your system completes its final transition, not into unconsciousness, but into pure restoration, where the body heals, the mind quiets completely, and the nervous system resets into its natural rhythm of balance. And all of this happens without effort, without instruction, without awareness needing to do anything at all. And now, even the idea of continuing fades, because there is nothing left to continue, nothing left to hold, nothing left to reach, only the deepest level of letting go. And in that letting go, sleep fully takes over, not as something arriving, but as something that was always waiting beneath everything. And now it is complete. You are not going anywhere. You are not doing anything. You are simply here in deep, complete, effortless sleep.